After wishing everyone a good evening, we started this Tosfos Katan, and I'm going to suggest that we first go through the point of the Gemara that's so important for this Tosfos, and that'll be a springboard for the Tosfos, and then we'll try to review the last thing that we discussed last week with regard to Katan. What's critical in this sugya here for our purposes is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Hey with regard to the parsha of what's called Asham Gzelos. And what goes on over there? The pasuk says, Im ein la'ish goel, which means the following, that let's say Reuven is Tovei Shimon, and he accuses Shimon of having stolen money from him. Shimon denies the claim, and then he takes a shvuah to the effect that he is not a gazlan. Later on, after he took the shvuah, he confesses that he took a shvuah sheker. And now he has to pay keren and chomesh, plus he has to bring a korban asham. And what happens, that's what the Torah is going to address now, in event that the Tovea, the Nigzal, dies after the Shvuah, but before the confession. So now when the Gazlan confesses his crime, and he has to pay Keren V'chomesh, to whom is he paying? And the answer is that he pays to the Yarshim. But the Torah says that we should check him out, see this Tovea after he dies. In Ein Le'ish Goel, if there are no Yarshim, then the money is paid to the Kohanim. So the Gemara now asks, what do you mean when it says in Ein Lish Goel? How could you have a Jew that dies that doesn't have a Yoresh? And the Gemara says we're talking about a Ger. And a Ger cannot have a Yoresh in a case where he doesn't have children. So let's say the Ger did not get married and have children. When he dies, he has absolutely no Yoresh. Okay.
Yeah,
then
children after you can do it.
Speak a little chop louder.
They're not called Yarshim if they were dying. Saying if he
Well, no, they're not related to it because Gerish is Karkin right. And now, if you take a look on Daf Samach Tesam and Aleph, it says the following: the pasuk says "Im ein la ish goel," and we already know from Ben Sora Morher that the word ish is coming to exclude a katan, and therefore Amar Achmona ish. To tell you that isha tatzarach lachzor olav im yesh lo goel im lav, if this ger was an adult, meaning he was an ish, he was bar mitzvah, then you have to check out and see, did he leave any children? Im lav, but if this ger is a katan, and that's going to be the whole sugya of ger katan, then yeh tatzarach lachzor olav, because biyadu she'ein lo go'alin, which means that a katan could not have children. But the point here is that a katan could have money, otherwise this whole parsha would be totally superfluous, and that money was stolen, and the whole scenario that took place. And in case the katan, who is the tovea, died, then you know that he has no yarshim. If he's a ger, I'm saying. If he's not a ger, then the yarshim go up, to the father and the uncle and so forth and so on. But if he's both a ger and a katan, and he dies, you know for sure that he has no yarshim. Why? Because he's a ger who's not related to any of his biological relatives, according to halacha, and he cannot be a father because he's only a katan. So that's what we have in this Gemara. Now, Tosfos is going to make a big deal about two things here. Number one, the katan, who was the nigzal, he's the tovea, he could generate a chiyuv of keren v'chomesh and a chiyuv of a korban asham. In event that he dies, then if he's a ger and so forth and so on, then we know he has no yarshim, the money goes to the kohen. But in event that he's alive and well, then his money was stolen, a shvur was taken to deny that it was stolen, and now that the Gazlan confesses, he has to pay a kem v'chomesh, and that's going to be the case of a katan. Now, obviously, this sugi is assuming that a katan could have mammon. Otherwise, it's impossible for a Gazlan to have stolen his mammon. And the first part of this tosis is going to be addressing the issue of how could a katan have mammon. The second part of the tosis is going to address a different problem. In order for the Gazlan to be chayev and to take the shvur, you need what's called a taina. A taina generates a chiv shvur. But in this case of a katan, we have a principle called a katan's taina is not called a taina. And therefore, we don't understand how this parsha of the shvur could be appropriate, could be relevant to the case of a katan, because a katan doesn't have a taina to generate a chiv shvur. That's going to be the second half of the tosis. The third half of the tosis is going to talk about ger katan. So let's just review what we said in the first part of the tosis. V'im tomar, tosis asks, uminole lahai katan mamona, ha'amrinan beperek Mishtameres, ein zechia lekatan. Which means that a katan could not acquire ownership over money. He just doesn't have a yad for kinyanim. So Tosfos says, well, wait a minute, maybe I can circumvent that problem. Maybe there was zachin li adam, in which a gadol was zochin mamon on behalf of the katan. And that's how the katan acquires ownership. Later on, Tosfos is going to raise a possibility that he inherits from his Morishim, he may have inherited money. But right now, Tosfos is leaving out Yerusha, and he's asking, are there any other methods by which a Kohen can acquire ownership over property, over Mammon, without Yerusha? And now Tosfos is suggesting maybe if he himself can't acquire ownership on his own behalf, maybe someone could acquire ownership for him, and will operate with the principle of Zachin li Adam. So in other words, if Reuven wants to be Zoche in Mammon on behalf of Shimon, he can do so, and that's called the parsha of Zechia, of Zachin li Adam, Shelo B'Fanav. So Tosfos rejects this possibility because he says that Ha'ikol Aman Diyomer B'Perek Mishtameres Zachin leGadol V'Ein Zachin leKatan. That means you cannot be zocha on behalf of a katan. And we'll see in just 1 minute why that's so. And Tosfos goes on to step further, afilu man diomer zochil lekatan, even according to that opinion in the Gemara Mishtameres, who that holds, maintains that there is zechia on behalf of a katan, it doesn't mean that the parsha of zechia applies even on behalf of a katan, but hainu midrabanan v'lo midaraisa. And at this point in Tosfos, he's going to raise the question as to why it's impossible on a deraisa level that there should be zechia for a katan. And Tosfos answers, here's where he sort of reveals the secret. The zechia mitorah shlichus. Tosfos is going to quote a sugya in Bab Metzia to prove that zechia is a branch or stands on the shoulders of shlichus. So the operation called zechia operates through the mechanics of shlichus. And where did Tosfos find this? In Bab Metzia Daf Yud Beis, the Amrin and Chatzer Mishum Yadis Rabbi V'lo Gar Mishlichus. So Chatzer operates midin shlichus, and therefore the Gemara says that a katan cannot be zocher through his own Chatzer. Why? Because if the Chatzer is operating on his behalf as a shliach, katan lav bar shlichus. And this is where we're going to take a pause. So sort of make a mental note of it, and we'll come back to Mihu, and then Tosfos is going to prove that, in fact, we can be zocha for a katan. But right now, Tosfos is stuck with the following problem, that if zechia is mitam shlichus, and a katan doesn't have shlichus, therefore zechia cannot operate on behalf of a katan, and we're back to square one. How could the katan be zocha in mammon? He can't be zocha on behalf of himself because ein zechia lekatan. And now he can't have someone else who's a gadol being zocha for him because that would mean that that person is operating as a shliach on behalf of Katan, and a Katan is excluded from shlichus. That's what we have so far. Now here, at this point, we have to ask the following question. Even if I grant Tosas's premise that Zchiyas mitam shlichus, and Tosas has a pretty solid basis for that in the Gemara Bava Metzia, but nevertheless, is it really so that a Katan does not have shlichus? Yesh lachkar. Is a Katan's exclusion from shlichus because he cannot appoint a shliach? In other words, the minui shliach of a Katan is not meaningful, so he can't set up a shliach. O Dilma, or is it that a Katan can't even have shlichus? And then Afkamita would be if we could circumvent the need for minui. In a case where we don't need minui, if let's say you had a shliach that was up and running and you didn't have to appoint the shliach, could he operate as the shliach of a Katan? And then Afkamita is going to be the case of Zechiyah, because in the case of Zechiyah, there's no need for minui. The very fact that it's a zchus on behalf of the Zocher, that itself generates the minui shlichus. So I'm granting Tosas' premise that Zechiyahs become shlichus, but I'm wondering whether that excludes Zechiyah on behalf of Katan. Because again, there is one Mandiyomer in the Gemara that says Zachin l'Katan. Tosas is claiming that's only the Rabbanan. But on a Deraisa level, no. A Katan can't have Zechiyah. Can't be Zoch on behalf of Katan because Zechiyah is mitam shlichus. Okay, I'm going to grant Tosas' premise, and Zechiyah is mitam shlichus, but that's because a Katan can't appoint a shliach, and therefore you have a problem in general shlichus. A Katan cannot appoint a shliach, and that's why we say ain't shlichus a Katan. But in the case of Zechiyah, it's very possible that a Katan could have shlichus, because the issue that excludes a Katan from shlichus is the minui shliach. Now, where do I come off saying such a thing? So this is the last piece that we had a week ago, which I want to review with you, because I think it's sort of, was kind of the last few minutes of Shia, and that is the Rambam in Perek Beis Mehilchas Gerushin Halacha Tesvav. And the Rambam has a case of a person who was a pikeach, that means he shafui b'dato, and he appointed a shliach to bring a get to his wife. So the get was already handed over to the shliach, and then before the shliach could deliver the get, the pikeach was nishtata, became a shota. Now the question is, can the shliach deliver the get on behalf of the mashalech who is a shota? A shota cannot be megarish. But if he has a shliach who stands in his place, the shliach could actually implement the gerushin on his behalf. And now the question is, can the shlichus operate on behalf of a shota? And guess what? The Rambam says that if this get was delivered by the shliach after the mashalech, after the megarish became a shota, then the get is possible. What does that mean? That's only the Rabbanan. The Rambam in Perek Beis Mehilchas Gerushin tells you that whenever I write the word pasul in Hilchas Gerushin, I mean with the Raisa it's kosher, and the Rabbanan pasul. The Tur in Shulchan Aruch in Even Ezer rejects this Rambam, and he says, what are you talking about? The get is not chal d'oraisa. So Bishleim, I understand according to the Tur, even though in this case the minui shlichus was accomplished because he was a pikeach at the time that he appointed the shliach, but nevertheless a Katan cannot have shlichus, and a shliach, bless you, cannot operate on behalf of Katan. And if that be the case, I understand very, very well why there's no din of zachin lekatan, because if zchiyas mitam shlichus, even though zchiyas circumvents the need for a minui, a Katan cannot have shlichus. In a word, according to the Torah, a Katan is excluded from shlichus. Period. But according to the Rambam, a Katan could have a shliach. He cannot create a shliach. Hence, if we would obviate the need for minui shlichus, like in the case of the pikeach who appointed a shliach, then the shlichus can operate on behalf of a cheresh shota v'katan. And if that be the case, then certainly the Rambam would disagree with this Tosfos, because Tosfos is saying, no, it can't be that Zochel L'Katan is Doraisa because Schia is Mitam Shlichus. Yeah, but Schia doesn't require what, Trebosai? A Minui, there's no need for a Minui. He's an upstanding, Shliach because of Zochel L'Adam. So therefore, Zochel L'Katan would be valid and would operate. Why? Because the Rambam is saying, at least on a Doraisa level, Zochel L'Katan, we don't need a minui, and therefore the katan is included in shlichus.
Does it make the sphere? You would say that the sphere automatically turns a person towards shliach without minui.
Absolutely. On that point, I will not be mavatir. I'm not going to give a.
No. I'm just trying to understand for myself. I'm not arguing with him.
Even if what's his name, Suna was here, I would find him tooth and nail.
I'm not arguing. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no. This is the mechanics of the halacha is that if a katan would have a zaken lekatan, it would mean that we simply have circumvented the need for minui. What's the chiddush of zaken li'adam? How's it different than shlichus?
You don't need minui.
Then you don't need minui because it's an objective schus, and this is the whole sugya in the second parak of Kiddushin about how the Nesiim was zocha on behalf of all of the members of Klal Yisrael and their portions in Eretz Yisrael. And the Gemara says, well, is that really a schus? Maybe he wanted a har and he got a bikah. You remember that sugya. But the bottom line of that sugya is that someone could operate on your behalf without you appointing him as a shliach. So yes, I agree that schia is mitam shlichus. The mechanics of schia is shlichus. But one thing you have to admit to me, there was no appointing of the shliach. There was no need for a minui. And in that case, the Rambam should argue that a katan could have zechir and zochel katan. At the end of the day, Tosfos is going to introduce another principle, which we're not ready for yet, das acheres makne. But we're not ready for das acheres makne right now.
You're speaking about the Rambam and Tur, is that issue, whether you need das to have a shliach or to be managed. But if even it's not it's about gerushin, it could be that a shliach just cannot, his wife can't be divorced from him. It could be with mechanic. Could be that the machlokas do that has to specifically with mechanic and gerushin. The local. Could it be a gerushin from the shliach or?
Well, if you can introduce that, then the situation gets even worse, because then what you're saying is that even the Torah might agree that a katan could have a shliach. Do you follow what I'm saying? I want to be happy with the profit that we have here from the Torah that a katan can't have a shliach, and that's certainly the sheet of Tosfos that a katan is excluded from zachen because zachen is based on shliach, and even though there's no need for minui, a katan can't have shliach because he can't have shlichus. So I'm happy with the Torah as we presented it. The Rambam, on the other hand, certainly would say two things. Number one, that the shota could be a magaresh, and number two, the Rambam would argue that a shota could have a shliach. Otherwise, this gerushin is not feasible.
Unless you argue that it's our shlichus, but retrospectively you make him from a shliach halachos to a shliach kabbalah, and then when he was a pekach.
Wait, David, give me a break here. I don't know how much I could get into the shliach halacha, shliach kabbalah. But all I'm just trying to point out to you is that there's a gerushin that's effectuated on a doraisa level, according to the Rambam, in the following scenario: the pikach appointed a shliach, gave him the get, and then the pikach became a shota, and the shliach delivered the get to his wife. And the Rambam says that on a doraisa level, this is a valid get. How could it be? How could a shota have a shliach? The answer is, a shota is a problem of minu shlichus, but here he was mamana the shliach as a god. I have one problem here. I don't know if I mentioned it last week. But what are we going to do with Tosfos' sugya here in Bab Metzia? The Gemara says in Bab Metzia that a Chatzer could not be zocha on behalf of katan. Why? Because Chatzer mitam shlichus. Yeah, but what kind of shlichus do we have in Chatzer? Without a minui. Correct? There's no meaning in a Chatzer. A Chatzer is an inanimate object. You weren't memana the Chatzer say hidini muchar mezuman lamanos eschal l'shliach. So how could it be, according to the Rambam, that the Gemara establishes that a katan cannot be zocha through Chatzer because Chatzer is mitam shlichus, when the Rambam holds that a katan can have a shliach, and therefore the Chatzer should operate as a shliach? And the Pella here is that I think the only way out, which again, I don't understand what I'm saying, I'm just giving you the mathematical conclusion, is that what the Rambam is saying is that if there was a minui, then a cotton could have shlichus. But if there was no minui, even the Rambam would agree that a cotton can't have shlichus. And then after is going to be Chatzer. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Possible way to have minui, that's a good point.
In other words, what we're saying, according to the Rambam, is that minui accomplishes some new category of shlichus such that it can operate even on behalf of katan. So a katan could have a shliach, but on one condition, that there was a minui, a valid minui, albeit not through the katan, he can't be mamana, but he was a pikach at the time that he made the minui. It's almost as if, you remember the pasuk, v'samcha yad al apar. It's like a smicha. The pikach gives smicha, so to speak, to the shliach. The shliach now takes over as if he's the megarish. In fact, if I remember correctly, there's a sheet of the Pri Chadash that the get itself has to be owned by the shliach. There's a pella when you think about it. What happens is the shliach actually steps into the shoes of the mishaleach, and forget about the Mishalech, forget about the Megarish. He's like out of the picture. In fact, there was a Havamina that even if the Mishalech dies, the Shliach could deliver the get. Okay, the Gemara rejects that because they can get Lachar Misa. But as far as Shlichus is concerned, the Gemara seems to assume that the Shliach could operate even after the Mishalech dies. How is that possible? Unless you assume a kind of a smicha. Do you follow what I mean by the mashal of smicha? That somehow the Mishalech, right?
He's becoming a boss.
Yeah, what's the word in English I'm looking for? He confers. Is there such a word? Oh. He confers all of his powers and his authority and his bias over to the shliach.
Well, power of attorney.
So therefore, power of attorney. Well, I don't know enough about law. Are you a lawyer? Who's a lawyer? Do we have a lawyer here in the audience? You did some law? What is power of attorney? See, I'm not sure what power of attorney is. It might be just classic shlichus, in which he's an agent on your behalf. I'm going beyond classic shlichus. I'm saying that the mishalech is no longer in the picture, that the shliach somehow takes over for him. And that's what the Rama means by pikeach shemina es shliach. The shliach now could deliver the get as if he were the mishalech. And therefore, in the case of Chatzer, where there was no minui, and for that matter, in the case of Zachar Lefanov, the Rama would agree to Tosas' position that there's no schia for a katan, there's no Chatzer for a katan, because there was never a minui. When does the Rambam accept shlichus on behalf of a katan? Only if there was a minui. Again, I'm just giving you a mathematical answer to this problem. I don't understand what I'm saying. I don't want you to think that this is what we call glat. This seems to be the only way that we can operate with this realm.
Where does a katan own a katan? Only where Yerusha, I'm saying, would only be a shliach of a katan if the katan owned the katan.
Correct.
Saying that schia,
every chutz has to be owned by the Baal HaChutz in order for the chutz to be konel.
In other words, immovable property or fixed asset, a katan can own by Yerusha. He can own.
Correct.
He can own by.
Correct. When we finish this whole tosis, we'll have to figure out how the Gemara assumes that a katan has a chutz. Right. So that's going to be totally, is it Yerusha? Is it through Das HaCharisma? Whatever it might be, we'll come up with that solution. Okay. Now at this point, Tosas takes a turn. This is like a turning point in Tosas. And he says the following. Umihu, I would press the return button here. Umihu, should start a new paragraph. Beperek hiskabel, this is in Gittin on Daf Samach Dalid Omen Beis. Kavitzror v'zorko egos v'notlo zoch liatzme zoch lacherim chayfetz umachziro liachar shah zoch ben liatzmo ben lacherim mashma dahainu da'orais. Now, watch what goes on over here. Tosas is quoting the opinion of Rav Asi in the Gemara. Rav Asi goes very far. Notice that he says that not only can a kata be zochel atzmo, he even can be zochel acherim. Now you might have said that that's only D'Rabbanan, some sort of Takonis Chacham. But Tosfos says, and we're going to spend a lot of time, maybe not tonight, but another time, on his proof that this is Doraisa. Umashma dahainu midoraisa. Midaparach l'man diyomer echad zev echad zeh zoch liatzmi ein zoch lacher me'ahi demarimin al Masechet demashma de zoch lacherim midoraisa. So there's a case of what's called pidyon Masechet, and the katan, the actual case was a katana, an omavriya, but that's not relevant to us. She was zocha in the pidyon on behalf of her master. And that means that a katan is zocha lacherim, and that has to be doraisa because we're dealing with pidyon Masechet. That's not a rabbinic area. So at this point, Tosfos has a breakthrough in which he sees that a katan can be zocha liatzma. Now, the Gemara is going to quote another opinion there, and I have the Gemara Gittin here on the table. We'll see maybe inside, that holds that no, katan could be zocha liatzmo, but not lacherim. But everybody, Kuli Amalo Pligi, hold that katan is zocha liatzmo. And Tosfos is now insisting that it's doraisa. So what that means is when we come back to square one and we ask how could a katan possess mammon, and we've rejected the possibility of zachin lekatan because that's based on shlichus, and a katan cannot have shlichus, but the katan might be able to be zocha for himself. And why is a katan able to be zocha for himself? He's a lav bar das. So we'll see the answer to that question in just a minute in Tosfos. But Tosfos says, you can't tell me that a katan is zocha liatzmo doraisa because we have a Mishnah in Gittin that metzias cheish shot to the katan yesh b'm gezel mipnei darkei shalom, which means that this was a takonis chachamim that established that a katan could be zocha in a metzia, in a hefker, in a lost object. So Tosfos says, no. I'll tell you why. And here's where Tosfos reveals the main secret. Midoraisa lo, because das acheres makno son shine. The key of keys, says Tosfos, to explain why a katan and how a katan could be zocha liatzmo is das acheres makno, which is not going to apply in the case of hefker, but rather it will apply in the case of matana or mechira. So if, let's say, I sell something or give a gift to a katan, I supply the das makne, and that's sufficient even if the katan is a labar das. You may recall, I'm not going to go over this again, we spent a whole hour on this, that the Shach quotes Yerushalmi, that even in the case of hefker, even without das acheres makne, the katan could be koned do'oraisa. And zocha liatzmo min hefker do'oraisa, the reason why the Mishnah invokes the principle of darkei shalom is because we talk about a katan who's not that mature. And that's where we had a whole discussion, if you recall, about kavana as opposed to das. Okay. Now, what we have in Tosfos is that katan zocha liatzmo, and according to one mandiyom that's Ravasi, he's even zocha lacherim. We're not going to talk about zocha lacherim until we get to the next part of Tosfos, but in this part of the Tosfos, we want to understand how a katan could be zocha liatzmo deoraisa. Tosfos says that's only in the cases of matana, matana mechira. What's unique about matana mechira? Das acheres mak. Now, Rabosai, where did Tosfos come off with this concept of das acheres mak? It's like a rabbit out of a hat. There's got to be some source somewhere in Shas for das acheres mak. So believe it or not, I found in the Encyclopedia Talmudit an erech called das acheres mak. And he says that the source for das acheres mak in Shas is the Gemara in Bav Metzia, which Tosfos had made reference to earlier. So let me open up the Gemara in Bav Metzia. The Gemara tells us on Daf Yud Aleph the following. Omar Ulam. This is the sugi of Chatzer, and Ula qualifies, and he says, when is a Chatzer operative? Vehu sha'omed b'tzad sadeh. So the Baal HaChatzer has to be standing there when the bird flew in, let's say. V'cheino Rabba bar Bachana vehu sha'omed b'tzad sadeh. Esvei Rabba Abba le'ula ma'ase b'Rabba Gamliel v'azkenim shayu boim b'sfina. Amar Rab Gamliel, Isur Shani Osid Lamud Nosin Liyoshua Umakomo Muskala. Isur Acher Shani Osid Lamud Nosin Lakiva Ben Yosef Kadesh Yizke Bola Ani Umakomo Muskala. So we're talking about Hafroshas Maser, and Rabbi Gamliel wants to be Mafresh Maser remotely from the Sfina. He's got Maser Rishon, and that has to be given to the Levi. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was a Levi, and he's on the boat, and he's going to be Zocher by virtue of a Kinyan Chatzer. How's it a Kinyan Chatzer? Because Rabbi Gamliel is going to be maskir the Makom where the Maser is. And therefore, the Maser is now in the Chatzer of Yeshua. And as far as Meiser Ani is concerned, Rabbi Akiva was the Gabbai of the Aniyim. And therefore, another Maser, which is Maser Ani on the 3rd and the 6th years of the Shemitah cycle, that's going to be given over to Rabbi Akiva through Chatzer, because Makomo Muskala. So the Gemara asks the following question: V'chi Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, each of which is Zocha respectively in Maser, B'tzad Sadeu Shel Rabbi Gamliel Hayu owned him. They were on the boat together with Rabbi Gamliel. So how could it be that through Chatzer they would be Kona the Maser without Omed B'tzad Sadeu? It was a kash on Ula, because Ula said that a Chatzer could only be operative if what? If he's Omed B'tzad Sadeu. And the Gemara goes through an entire sugya until we get to Rav Papa. So again, if you want to get a chance to look this up in Bab Metzia, you'll see parallel to the Tosas Nasan Liyoshua. It says Rav Papa Omar Das Acheres Makna Oson Shain. So let's understand Rav Papa. This is the source for the principle of Das Acheres Makna. What's happening here is that we require Omed B'tzad Sadeh. Otherwise, the Chatzer cannot be operative, because it's what's called a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres. The Chatzer is not protecting anything within it. It's open on all sides. And such a Chatzer is not capable of being Kona. You need Omed B'tzad Sadeh. However, says Rav Papa, there's one exception to that rule. If the bird flies down from heaven and lands in this Chatzer, and it's a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres, the Bailam are not standing next to the Chatzer, then the Chatzer would not be Kona. However, if it's a case of Hakna, which means Mechira Matana, then we have a principle, says Rav Papa, of Das Acheres Mak. Now, what the encyclopedia doesn't do for me, which was a big disappointment for me, is to explain to me how this operates. Okay, Das Acheres Makna, but you just finished telling me, according to Ula and Rabbah, that a Chatzer cannot effectuate a kinyan on behalf of the Baal Chatzer unless he's Omed B'tzad Sadeu to make it into a Chatzer Mishtameres. What does Das Acheres Makna accomplish over? Very nice and impressive that there's a Das Acheres. It's not like a case of Hefker, where the tzvi, there's a deer that runs through your soda and it's limping and whatever. And if you want to call it the Chatzer, you're not over. I understand that. But now you're telling me if there's Das Acheres Makna, then the Chatzer is Kona even without Omed B'tzad Sadeu. So we see the power of Das Acheres Makna. And Tosfos, based on this principle, the precedent of which is here in a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres, is going to build a whole theory that Das Acheres Makna means that we can be Zoche for the Katan, in the case of Mechira Matana, even though the cotton is a la bardas, and the cotton will now be zoche de oraisa on this matana or this mecher. Why? How? Because of das acheres makna. And somehow, Tos's analogy, he equates the das acheres makna in cotton with the das acheres makna in chutz.
Well, I guess it's right, it's more intuitive, because what you're lacking is that. So that's a charismatic, implies the that. So it's actually more intuitive if it's a Chatzer. It's Chatzer.
But I'm just wondering, let me think out loud with you. Das acheres makna, in the case of a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres, how does that operate?
Right, how's it work?
If you would ask me, again, I'm just telling you what I would say. I want to read to you the sheet of Mekubetzes and Bava Metzia. But if you would ask me intuitively, how does das acheres makna help you in a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres? I would tell you the following. And again, you can laugh me out if you want, but this is what I would say. The problem with the Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres is that every kinyan requires hachnasa l'shus. What do I mean by hachnasa l'shus? Let's say, for example, there's a kinyan called Mesira, right? You own a horse and you want to transfer ownership to me for the horse. So I grab the horse by the reins and now I have control over the horse. Or, for example, Mashicha. Mashicha means I take it into my rishus, or perhaps into a simta, and I take it daled amos. In all these cases, what the kinyan accomplishes is that you are demonstrating that you've taken it into your rishus. And that means you, so to speak, have control over the object. And again, I'm not going to argue with you whether or not I have physical control. Am I standing there with a gun, and anyone comes by, I'm going to, knock his block off. But at least on a legal conceptual level, it's considered that I have a tfisa on the object. And that's what kinyanim are all about. And we're talking about metaltal. Even in karka, you might have something similar, which is called nal garu parats, where you have a tfisa on the karka, and that forms a kinyan chazak. But let's just focus on metaltal. If I grab onto this tzvi, then I've done a ma'aseh kinyan because the tzvi is tafus biyadi. The problem with the Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres is if the Bailam is on the other side of the world and the Chatzer is here, how can the Chatzer be a tofes and grab onto the object on behalf of someone who is 1,000,000 miles away? Anyone's going to come into the Chatzer and grab it. Here's where here's where Rav Papa says, Das acheres makna. You know what? There's a makna over here. He wants to accomplish this kinyan. That's his vested interest. That's his agenda. So he wants to offer a shmira, so to speak, and make this Chatzer into a tofes. I don't need the Bailim as the das koneh to make the Chatzer into tofeses. I can have the das makna replace and, so to speak, serve as a substitute for the owner of the Chatzer, because just like the owner of the Chatzer wants this kinyan to be valid, so too the makna, the mocher or the nosei matana, wants this kinyan to be chal. And therefore, he's going to he has vested interest in protecting the Chatzer on behalf of the Bailim. And in fact, if anyone else would come along and say, I'm going to grab the object, he'll knock his block off. I gave this object specifically to this person, the Baal HaChatzer, and I don't want you to take it. So there's some human action over here, or human intention, to make sure that this Chatzer grabs onto the object on behalf of the owner of the Chatzer. So what difference does it make whether it's the das koneh or the das makna? Whether it's the person who's transferring ownership or the person who's receiving the ownership? Either way, what you have is an upgrade on this Chatzer to make it into a Chatzer hatofeses. And now I want to read to you the sheet of Mekubetzes in Bava Metzia. Listen to the sheet of Mekubetzes on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. He says the following: Nira lemori harav Rabbeinu Peretzal, one of the Balei Tosfos, the bechol duchta beinon Chatzer Mishtameres. We always require a Chatzer Mishtameres. V'teda toha mitam shlichus hu demahani. A Chatzer is a shliach. Ki deka'amar schusu lo. V'chol shliach mishtamehu l'shlolcha. If you send the shliach is going to protect the object on which he's making a kinyan on behalf of the Mishaleach. The shliach bardas be'inu. However, in a case of a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres, the Chatzer is not a bardas. He's not like a shliach who is watching, watching out for the best interest of the Mishaleach and guarding the object. However, says Rabbeinu Peretz Yeshlomer Dibba Matana, right? That's Dasacheres Makne, Moil Gam SheEno Mishtameres. Why? Listen to the language. Mishum Di'ena Mishtameres Ki Mishtameres Domin. I'll read that again. That has to be emphasized. Mishum Di'ena Mishtameres Ki Mishtameres Domin.
Why?
Listen how he explains it. Dili Olam Hi Mishtameres Lamakabel. Now that there's a no Seina Matana, the object is being guarded on behalf of the Makabel, just like in the case of a Shliach. Afki Chatzer itself, Eina Mishtameres, Kevan de Dasacheres Makne, Hare Ein Shum Adam Yachol Liknos Bo. Liknos Bo, I don't know why I used the word Liknos Bo, I would have said Litvos also, because we have a Das Makne. V'hu nosna umakna osel makabel nimtza shamatona mishtameres la makabel. Meaning on behalf of the makabel, afki ena mishtameres, even though in and of itself the Chatzer is not mishtameres, but mabakach mikol makom, since others cannot be zocha ein acher yichom liskospa avol mitzia the hefker kol hakodim zocha. No one is holding on to this hefker on behalf of the Baal HaChatzer. It's open on all sides. Anyone's going to come in and grab it. In any event, the bottom line is that Rabbeinu Peretz is outspoken as saying that Das Acheres Makna transforms a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres into a Chatzer Mishtameres. And you'll ask why? The answer is that just like a Shliach, even without the Mishaleach's availability, he's not on site, yet the Shliach could accomplish what he has to accomplish and effectuate a kinyan on behalf of the Mishaleach because he's making sure that this object is guarded and specifically dedicated to the Mishaleach. So too a Chatzer could do the same thing. It's Eina Mishtameres, anyone could come in and take it. No. There's a Das Acheres Makna. If you talk about a Hefker object, then Eino Chinami, everyone can take it. Who can take it? Anyone can take it. But if you're talking about a matana, the Baal HaChefetz wants only this guy who owns the Chatzer to be makabel and be zocha the matana. He's going to stand up for his rights and exclude anyone else. And that converts and transforms the Chatzer into a Chatzer Mishtameres.
You know the Makna is not there either.
Oh, that's a good question. You mean Rabbi Yeshua's on the boat? Yeah.
The giver.
Right, Rabbi Gamliel's on the boat.
So the Makne.
No, wait a second. Rabbi Gamliel is the owner of the Chatzer, and then he gives the Chatzer over to Rabbi Yeshua. Wait, let me just work this out. And then Rabbi Yeshua wants to be Zocha through his Chatzer, but he himself is not there, and Rabbi Gamliel, who's being mocked, is not there. Excellent.
It's not Hefker.
Correct.
It's owned by somebody.
Correct. Legally, no one can take it. That's what he's saying. That's the Das Acheres Makna means that now this Chatzer becomes a Chatzer Mishtameres. It's not Hefker and anyone can take it. I mean, again, you might have a Gazlan who'll take it, but
I'm giving it to you to the exclusion of everyone else.
Correct, exactly. I'm not going to give it to anyone. Hefker is for everybody, but this is for one person, no one else, and therefore.
You want to put it in the Chatzer.
No, a hefker means that it flew down. A deer, roamed into your Chatzer. Follow what I'm saying? This actually happened to a cousin of mine. You won't believe this in Edison, New Jersey. But what happens is apparently a deer doesn't have very good eyesight. So the deer went through the glass, and they had to call, I don't know, which exact Hatzola, and they took away the deer, and that was it. But could you imagine having a deer in Edison, New Jersey, coming through your window? You know what I'm saying? In any event, so that's a case of hefker. There's no Chatzer Mishtameres here. There's no Chatzer Tofeses. You know, the Chatz has to grab onto the object, but if there's no one around and it's hefker, who's going to grab onto the object? But you have two possibilities, says Rabbeinu Peretz. Either the Machne, let's start the other way. Either the Kona himself is standing next to his Sada, and he makes the Sada into a Sada, a Chatzer Mishtameres, or even if the Machne is standing and he wants to be Machne into the Chatzer, that too makes it into a Chatzer Mishtameres. I have only one problem. How is this going to explain Tosfos? Tosfos wants to suggest that Das Acheres Machne allows a katan to be zocher. What does that have to do with Chatzer? Meaning the whole analogy to Chatzer is off, how do you say, off is askew. It's off base. I want everyone to understand this point. Tosfos wants to establish Das Acheres Machne, that a gadol could be kone and zocher on behalf of katan. Even though the katan is a labar das, says Tosfos, you don't need das kone, all you need is das machne. Why? What's the proof for Tosfos? Because a das Acheres Machne makes a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres into a Chatzer Mishtameres. As the Israelis would say, ma kesher. My children say this to me all the time. Ma kesher. It's like a parrot. Well, what's the connection here? This is a leap of faith. Very nice that the Chatzer is now a Chatzer hatofeses hamishtameres, as Rabbeinu Peretz says, because the Machne is giving it to him exclusively, no one else. Wonderful. But therefore, Das Acheres Machne, in the case where there's not a bar das to be kone, in the case of a katan, I can be machne as a gadol on behalf of the katan because I'm a das acheres machne. How do we know that das acheres machne could supplant or replace the need for das kone?
Why?
No, I'm just saying. Again, Rabosa, you have to empathize with me. No, but no. Why should you empathize with me? And not just throw me out. Because, as far as I know, I could be wrong. I'm not a book in Shas. There is no source in Shas for Das Acheres Machne other than Rav Papa in Bava Metzia, Daf Yud Aleph on the page. That's got to be your paradigm in case of Das Acheres Machne. Tosfos himself is quoting this sugya. Tosfos is aware of this whole sugya about Chatzer. How did Tosfos prove that a katan cannot have zechia in the first half of Tosfos? Because zechia is mitam shlichus, and that's the sugya of Chatzer, right? The Gemara says that Chatzer is mitam shlichus, and therefore Chatzer is not kona on behalf of a katan. The Gemara says that zechia is mitam shlichus, and therefore there's no zechia for a katan. I mean, that's the Keresh Kvitzai of this whole Tosfos is that sugya Rav Papa. But what does Rav Papa have to do with the issue of zocher l'katan? That Das Acheres Machne could replace the Das Koda.
It's just like the Chatzer also doesn't have any God, so I worked with Chatzer, I worked for
yeah, but wait a second. The Chatzer doesn't have Das, but the Baal HaChatzer has Das. So that the Das Acheres Machne, it doesn't mean that we don't need the Das of the Kohen. We have Das of the Kohen. The owner of the Chatzer is a Gadol, he's not a Katan. Nor of us, we don't have Omi besides Sadeu. That's where Rabbeinu Peretz plugs in Das Acheres Machne. Das Acheres Machne is going to fill the hole Yimaleh Chisaron of Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres. It's going to upgrade the Chatzer to a status of a Chatzer Mishtameres. What does that have to do with a Katan being Zocher through Das Acheres Machne when he has no Das to be Kohen? So I suspect that Tosfos doesn't agree with Rabbeinu Peretz. And he had another approach to the question of das acheres makna Rav Papa and a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres. It's not that the das acheres makna transforms the Chatzer into a Chatzer hamishtameres. No. A Chatzer can do a tfisa even without Omed B'tzad Sadeh. Omed B'tzad Sadeh is a requirement in Chatzer for a totally different reason. And that is to create das koden. If I'm in Kalamazoo and my Chatzer is here in AS, in Alon Shvut, then anything that's put into my Chatzer, I'm unaware of. If I'm unaware of it, there's no das koden. How could I be coded in a Chatzer when I'm not Omed B'tzad Sadeu?
So Chatzer is like, isn't the Chatzer acting as your shaliach?
So what, the Chatzer, like you said before, has das koden? I want to, Mr. Chatzer, or Mrs. Chatzer, Chatzer is actually in Lashon Nekevim, Mrs. Chatzer, come in here and you tell me that you have das koden on behalf of the owner of your Chatzer. Come on, that's ridiculous.
Why is that?
The Chatzer is an inanimate object. How can the Chatzer have das koden?
What's Mishtameres different?
What do you say?
Why is Mishtameres different? If
I'll tell you why.
Mishtameres-
Because Mishtameres means you're Omed B'tzad Sadeu. The Gemara identifies Mishtameres as Omed B'tzad Sadeu. If you're Omed B'tzad Sadeu, you have das koden.
There's a fence.
yeah, Mishtameres,
It's like get into a Chatzer, woman's not there,
it's still the law.
is she still divorced?
Again, I'm not paskening, but based on the knowledge that we have until now, the answer is no. Because if you don't have Omed B'tzad Sadeu, then you see, get might be different. I'll tell you why. Because get doesn't require das konen. But I'm talking about a case where you need das konen. You know, the two sides. You know, it takes two to tango. We need both the das makna and the das konen. But if he's not Omed B'tzad Sadeu, then where's the das konen? And that's where our Papa plugs in das acheres makna. The das acheres makna substitutes for the das konen. And if that be the case, I begin to understand how a gadol could be zoch on behalf of a katan. How does that work? Tosa says it's das acheres makna. But the katan is a la bar das. If the katan is a la bar das, what are we lacking? What kind of das? Das konen. I have a solution, says Tosus. I don't need das konen. All I need is das makna. And if I have das makna, the das makna supplies even the das konen. Where do you see such a thing? What a chutzpah noira. How can you tell me such a thing? Go fly a kite. Das makna is going to substitute for das konen? Yes. In a Chatzer, SheEno Omed B'tzad Sadeu, there's no das konen. So how is he konen? The answer is, says Rav Papa, das acheres makna. What does that mean? What do you mean das acheres makna? Where's the das konen? It must be that the das acheres makna fills in for the das konen. I don't need das konen if I have a das makna. Billy Playim. And if that be the case, then you could be zoch on behalf of katan. The katan is a la bar das, so you don't have das konen, but you have a das makna, and a das makna can substitute for das konen. A whole other pshat is not Rabbeinu Peretz.
What you said about that, you want to prove that the Chatzer is konen because like if it's just so real, you don't know what went into your Chatzer. Right, you're saying you don't know when into your Chatzer, you don't know when. So obviously there's no das konen because you don't know when into your Chatzer.
Right.
But we're learning this whole case that's burned the boat. The ones that went on the boat, they knew that he was.
No, but again, I'm not going.
Was going into.
Wait, let me explain. You're asking an excellent question, but what I'm saying is, we don't go into detail. You know, today we have great ways of communication, right? I have this Zoom over here. I can see through this Zoom what's going on in California. Can I not? If there's someone on the other end in California on Zoom. So you're going to tell me, well, I'm going to put my Chatzer on Zoom. You know, I'll have someone, you know, or you know, we have what do they call those things? Satellites, right? Now I through my satellite, I can see my Chatzer from the other. That's not the point. You know, halacha works with certain definitions. We don't have to be, you know, nitpicking and ask if in every single case, you know, it's exactly the way you describe it. There's a principle in Chatzer that requires Omed B'tzad Sadeu. And the Gemara understands that the Omi B'tzad Tzadeu is based on Das Kona. So then how in the world can a Chatzer ever operate when he's not Omi B'tzad Tzadeu, like in this case? And the answer would be, says Rav Papa, Das Acheres Makna. Whoa, that's a breakthrough. Das Acheres Makna when there's no Das Kona? If you're telling me that if he's not Omi B'tzad Tzadeu, there's no Das Kona, again, not in your case, but in general, that's the way the halacha defines and operates, that there's no Das Kona. So what's Das Acheres Makna? Says Tosfos is an amazing breakthrough here, that Das Makna substitutes for the need for Das Kona. And by the way, the Yerushalmi goes even further. The Yerushalmi goes as far as, if you remember the Shach quoting the Yerushalmi, to say that this works even in Hefker. Where's the Das Acheres Makna in Hefker? So you see that, what we're playing with here is that, sometimes you need Das Makna, sometimes you need Das Kona, sometimes Das Kona could operate on its own, like in the case of Hefker. Sometimes Das Acheres Makna could operate in the case of Matana Mechira, even without Das Kona. This is the breakthrough of Bab Metzia Yud Aleph Amid Beis of Rav Papa. In the light of that breakthrough, Tosfos says a katan could be zoche doraisa. How does a katan know anything doraisa? The answer is Das Acheres Makna.
I think what Adam's asking is, if you can't be koine,
What does it say over there? Does that say 6 o'clock?
That's wrong.
Oh, that's got to be wrong. I didn't get it until after 7.
8:39.
Unless we took a, they once had this plane. What was it called? The Concorde. Anybody old enough to remember that?
Sure.
I don't know. They took it out for some reason.
British Airways from London to New York.
Yeah, so the famous story about somebody was nifter in Britain, and they called up the rabbi from New York, and can you get here really quickly, to officiate at the Levaya? So he says, all right, I'll take a Concorde plane. He got there before the Petira. You didn't get the joke. Anyway.
No, but so the
So I was thinking maybe I took a Concorde plane.
The practical situation, someone is far away from his Chatzer. You can't acquire it, but you can give it to someone else. I mean that.
No, you're raising the question of Rabbi Gamliel. That you talk about because Rabbi Gamliel was far away. Okay, again, Rabosai, I'm asking you to put on your mathematical thinking caps. I have a mathematical problem here. I have an assumption, which again, I could be wrong, but my assumption is there's nowhere in Shas where you'll find Das Acheres Makna except for a papa with regard to a Chatzer SheEno Mishtameres. And yet, Tosfos wants to be machadesh that a katan could be zoche doraisa in a matana or mecher because of Das Acheres Makna based on this Rav Papa. So I've got a mathematical issue over here. As I said before, Ma'akesha. How can you make an analogy between Dinei Chatzer and the question of Das Kona? Katan doesn't have Das Kona. How can he be Kona? And you're telling me he's Kona Doraisa because of Das Makna. So it must be mathematically that Tosfos understood that in the case of a Chatzer and Eno Omi B'tzad Tzadeu, what Rav Papa was machadish here is that Das Acheres Makna substitutes for Das Kona. Otherwise, the equation to the case of a Katan who's lacking a Das Kona makes no sense. So if you can empathize with my mathematical calculations, then we have a deal.
Okay. I think what happening is that the Papa makes that Kiddush, in the case of the boat, where there is that coming. Because Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shua are.
Okay, but again, we're trying to conceptualize why the halacha operates with the requirement of Omed B'tzad Tzadeu. So we're suggesting, in order to make sense out of this Tosfos that we're learning here in Sanhedrin, not Tosfos from Metzia, we're learning Tosfos in Sanhedrin in Perek Ben Sora More. We're trying to make sense out of the jump here in terms of the power of Das Acheres Makna. What is the accomplishment of Das Acheres Makna?
It just sounds like you yourself can't. in ownership, you can only transfer that which you have, right? A Gazan can't transfer to someone else something that he doesn't have. You can't transfer ownership in the object. You can't transfer.
I didn't hear the last word you said.
Gazan can't transfer ownership in the object. He can have, let's say, a personal contract, but he can't transfer ownership that he doesn't have.
Okay,
But here, the
that makes
Das
sense.
Makne, the Das Makne, how will he get the ownership if it's with Chatzer, SheEno, Mishtameres?
Well, again, I'm the Makna, right? I want to give you a gift. It's my object. I didn't steal it. It's mine. It's registered in Tabu. It's mine.
But how's it yours? If it's in a Chatzer,
What do you mean how it's mine? I was Koned. I paid for it. I grew it. My Siyadayim. It was, it was fruits in my field. Again, now I want to transfer it over to you. Correct? You're a good guy. I want to give you a gift. I put it in your Chatzer. Where are you? You're on the other side of the world. You're still in South Africa. And I put it into your Chatzer here in Yerushalayim. How are you Koned? And Rav Papa says, even though you're not near your Chatzer, you're in South Africa. It was a 9-hour flight. I don't know how it is. Nevertheless, you're Koned because of Das Acheres Makna. So it's like the Das Acheres Makna on a conceptual level, again, not physically, means that I am hovering over your Chatzer on your behalf. Do you follow what I mean? Because I am designating this object for you, putting it into your Chatzer in Yerushalayim, not letting anyone else be soaked in it, and that intention, which excludes everyone else, is as if I am there at your Chatzer and I'm guarding the object like a shliach who guards something on behalf of the Shalem.
So clearly, Toshos is agreeing that when the Das Makne gives it to the Katan, he's saying, I'm giving it to you to the exclusion of everybody else. As a Katan take it. No, because Das Acheres Makne.
Correct.
It's good enough, and that's an error.
That's the power of Das Acheres Makne. It's magical, but it's Das Acheres Makne. So again, I know we have to stop soon, but I just want to sort of read the next piece of toast so we know what we're up to for next week. That's my style. He says the following. Yeah. He says, "V'hashta nicha hadiyom perik lulav v'arava lo liknei inish lulave liyanuka." You should not be makne your lulav to a child before you yotze in it on the first day of Yont. If the yanuka mikne kani, he can be kone, and aknuye lo makne. And mikne kani afilu b'daraisa. How could the katan be zoche and acquire ownership on a daraisa level when he's a labar das? And he now owns the lulav on a daraisa level. It's not yours anymore. You're in deep trouble. You don't have a lulav. And the answer must be the al yidei das acheres maknos on zochim daraisa. And this is a pella because it means that there's no das kone, there's only das makne, and yet that's enough to effectuate a kinyan daraisa. The cut owns it daraisa. And this is all according to Rav Asi. Oh, I'm sorry. And lacherim lirav Asi. That's where I want to pick it up next week. What do I mean? What I'm baffled by is that Rav Asi went a step further in the Gemara in Gittin Daf Samach Daled, and he claimed that not only can I be socher on behalf of the katan, because I'm a gadol and it's das acheres makne, but I can even give it to the katan and he'll be zocha to another gadol. Do you follow this? Reuven, a katan, and Shimon. Reuven wants to transfer ownership to Shimon through the agency of a katan. And Rav Asi goes as far as to say that the katan could serve as the shliach on behalf of Shimon to be kona through das acheres makne. Now, wait a second. We say the das acheres makne would supply the das kona, but here the katan is doing the ma'aseh kinyan. And he can only be operating in the ma'aseh kinyan on behalf of Shimon through the power of what? Shlichus, but it can't be a shliach. liatzmo l'kuli alma. Okay, liatzmo l'kuli alma means that even I think it's Rav Chisda, if I remember correctly, who argues against Rav Asi, and he holds that no, a cotton could be zocha liatzmo through das acheres makna, but not lacherim. But everybody agrees that the cotton could be zocha liatzmo on a deraisa level through das acheres makna. Now we have an issue that Rav Asi wants to go a step further and allow the cotton to be zocha lacherim as the middleman between the das acheres makna and the kohen. Doesn't make any sense. You know, you may say das acheres makna so that the kohen himself doesn't have to have das, but nevertheless he needs a shliach, he needs a katan. This I don't understand. So Baruch Hashem, I have a full week to think about it and see if I can come up with anything. Okay then. Does anybody have a calendar? I'm going to be missing one shir in December. If you want to make a note of it, if it's relevant to you. It's not the first Tuesday. What's
December
the first?
6th is next Tuesday.
Yeah, no, that I'm here. But the one after that is the 13th.
December 13th.
Right, the 13th, I think will be in America. That should be like almost Erev Hanukkah or something.
Well,
First night of Hanukkah is the next night.
19th. Yeah, I'll be back on the 20th, I think. The first, when is? Yeah. I'll certainly remind you. I'll certainly remind you. Yes. I hope you got something out of the shit. There's a lot of love to see it.
No, it's beautiful.